So I'd like to begin before explaining my talk, which 20 minutes, on a series of sort of relatively unrelated disjunctive observations, which is the use of nature as a category, as a method of reasoning. We're all quite familiar, I imagine, with nature as an object, as a phenomenon that demands that we think about it ideologically, politically, scientifically, ethically, etc. From American 19th century transcendentalism, New Age Buddhist spiritualism, from discourses on radical popular movements to reactionary neoconservatism. Nature is often used as a justification, as a form of thinking. We often hear things like, it is unnatural to be homosexual. It is natural to love each other, and so on. Now, people might quickly say, well, this is simply a misuse of the category of nature. We know that there is a natural order. We know that things occur naturally, and to claim that it's unnatural to be homosexual, we just haven't understood nature yet. After all, we can appeal to a register of the natural. We can say that there are biological laws, there are chemical properties, there are particles that constitute a substantial material reality as it is. We can argue that there are DNA structures, brain functions that are inherently natural. At the same time, these claims to a fixity, a stability of a category of nature reveals itself to be quite unstable. Epigenetics teaches us that cultural formations, in fact, have quite a powerful ability to reshape the natural. Language, cultural forms of communication can alter DNA, can alter brain formations. Even the terrifying dawn where Einstein, with his students in 1936, accidentally stumbles upon entanglement theory and says, look at the nonsense that quantum physicists are dealing with. Well, the quantum physicists take this negation as one of their basic presuppositions, in the same way that Freud takes basic metaphysical or ontological presuppositions. There must be negation. There must be time for things to exist. He inverts these. Okay, fine. If these are necessary, then the unconscious has none of these. In the same way, quantum physics, therefore, to keep it short, argues that no, there is even the basic properties of particles are not the same once they're observed, once a subjective moment is introduced to them. Chesterton will say that these paradoxes in the basic constitution of reality depend on their cultural appropriation. Now, my presentation will not go into all of this because it's too much. Instead, I will simply suggest, via a generalized use of Hegel, a particularized use of Hegel, and a brief presentation on sexuality, the paradoxes of sexuality. I will suggest that where nature as a method of reasoning always reveals its misuse, that we haven't quite reasoned about nature properly. What Hegel teaches us, and Lacan teaches us, is that this is not instances of miscategorization. We haven't quite figured out what is natural and cultural. It's that the category of the natural in itself is simply incomplete. It doesn't work out. It doesn't lend itself to a stable, independent articulation. To begin with this, we will begin with Hegel. and I will try to keep this on Lacan as much as possible, which is why I'm here. But so we begin with one of the works that will influence Lacan extensively, the Phenomenology of Spirit, which I won't go into too much, but I'll mainly state some of the moments constitutive of this conceptual reconstruction of thought that Hegel offers us. Firstly, substance, which I will vulgarize here, and Barbara might point this out to me later on. Substance, if we call it what there is, quite simply, naturally what there is. For Hegel, well, substance is a truth. What there is something a bit more in disparity towards itself. As the famous phrase that Hegel will write in his preface says, we must recognize truth not only as substance, but also as subject. For Hegel, the moment where substance is capable of reflecting upon itself in a particular instance is where substance as this internally self-discrepant, subjectively bracketing moment, a part of the whole, which seems to reconstruct or question the whole as such, is where a certain truth might be inscribed. This logic, Hegel says, only unfolds as the phenomenology progresses. Beyond that too, technically. And what is interesting is that where observation, where thinking, where reasoning is faced with the natural world, Hegel endlessly insists that its confrontation with the natural world is a series of disappointments. You begin with sense certainty, a imminent conviction in the stability, the presence, the here and now of the this that we are presented with in everyday life. Hegel quickly says that, well, we have to dismiss this imminence, this presence, this certainty of the natural, and recognize its mediation by universal laws. The this is not the this of this chair, it's an appropriation of this as a mode of subjective reasoning. The same thing goes where scientific reasoning turns to nature and wants to articulate nature as a free, independent totality. It quickly abandons this pursuit and focuses on its self-conscious agency in even the basic coordinates for an articulation of nature. It finds no capacity to articulate nature as it is for itself. This is the universal sort of, let's say, version of this. And before explaining how this helps Hegel's dismissal ultimately of the category of nature, which he does in his Aesthetics, I will move on to the way we can understand it via sexuality. Now, sexuality for Freud is an interesting category. He gives an example of a bricklayer in the Dora case. He speaks of, let's imagine well, to him, what he calls the structural necessity of the symptom. A bricklayer may one day, horrendous accident, he finds that his way of working with his hands, of earning his living by physical labor, is taken away from him. He comes to depend on the charity of others, of family, of friends. He might even become a beggar on the streets who earns his means by the charity of strangers. If some time passes and a magic worker, some miracle cure comes, which allows for this man to, after years of having adapted to his new, impeded, imperfect, distorted lifestyle, to take away this condition, Freud says we shouldn't be surprised if he rejects this offer. His imperfect functioning, his distorted functioning, is his functioning. Remove the distorted, symptomatic, imperfect functioning. Freud argues you don't get to the pure, normal subject as such. You remove the basic coordinates for a subject. It is by functioning imperfectly that something can function, that a symptom allows a subject to function by the very fact that it functions imperfectly. This is sexuality for Freud. This is the sexuality for Lacan. This is sexuality for Laplanche. All of this argument stems generally, you can say, from the fact that sexuality as a mode of enjoyment is an enjoyment that disseminates from or is grounded in a more constitutive fundamental lack of enjoyment or non-enjoyment. The sublime unity of mother and child is never attained. The immediate natural relation to what one desires and oneself isn't possible. What you have is an endless series of dissatisfaction through which sexuality as such might come to be a coherent, autonomous function. The point for Lacan is that, as he would say, il n'y a pas de rapport sexuel. There is no sexual relation. Sexuality is in itself a reactive formation to the fact that there is no sexuality. For Lacan, you enjoy the fact that you are not capable of enjoying. You're not capable of enjoying the mother. You're not capable of enjoying the sublime object of what is called wiederfinden, of refinding. You are not capable of enjoyment, and you come to enjoy this impotence. It's what Lacan interprets castration as. Now, sexuality is therefore an already distorted, already sublimated formation. There is no pure sexuality. Behind a distorted, imperfect, fetishized, perverted, masochistic, sadistic, horrifying sexual relation, we do not find the innocence of a pure, neat, direct object relation. We find no object relation. This, to me, I'll happily defend this thesis more in the questions, but this is Freud's fundamental thesis in the three essays. It's his fundamental thesis in fetishism, that there is, in fact, no pure moment of sexuality. Sexuality always already is reacting to a more constitutive, empty space. I have 4 minutes. So I will move on from this, and I will simply say that well, I wanted to speak, okay, for Lacan, this is why sexual liberation is possible. To multiply discourses on sexuality, to multiply tolerance of sexuality, is to further alienate it from its constitutive impasse. And to do this is to further recognize the fact that nature is a false category for sexuality. A natural state of things does not exist for sexuality. It is always a cultured, discursive distortion of a lack or an empty impossibility of a natural state of things. The nature for psychoanalysis is dismissed by sexuality. The aesthetics of Hegel. I'm going to have to go quickly. So for Hegel, what lends an idea to its particularization within art is the fact that this universal essence of the idea is capable of becoming what he calls an ideal of aesthetic beauty by the fact that it presupposes its appearing. He takes this from his logic. It is essential to essence that it appears. It's a self-explanatory statement. Things must, in order to understand essence, it is crucial that essence is something that is observable for someone. It must appear. And this for Hegel is crucial. There are 3 conditions to an idea being aesthetically represented, sensibly represented by a piece of concrete art. It must lend itself to its otherness, to its appropriation, its observance in otherness. The content to be sensibly expressed must not be an empty abstraction. It is a universal that presupposes concrete articulation. The truthfulness of the idea can be expressed truthfully because the individuality of it is that it is essentially concrete. The 3 conditions basically posit that it is essential to something that it presupposes in itself its registration in an observer. This is the idea. The aesthetic idea is capable of being sensually artistically expressed through this. Nature for Hegel doesn't allow for this. Nature is not an aesthetic essence. It's not a universal that presupposes its registration in the eyes of an observer. He will talk about Zeuxis and Parrhasius, the two Greek painters. I'm sure you all know this. The Greek painters challenge each other who can depict the most natural painting. One paints some grapes, and some doves land and start attempting to eat the grapes. Parrhasius goes to show his painting, and he shows the curtain on the wall. And Zeuxis says, okay, open the curtains and let me see the painting. He says, well, the curtain is the paintings. For Hegel, this pre-reflexive natural moment of aesthetic articulation, the articulation of nature, is always already an articulation of between human subjects. It's a aesthetic project for humans by humans. It's a cultural project already in itself. And ultimately, Hegel will dismiss the use of nature as a mode, a coordinate, even for aesthetic critique, arguing that it doesn't fit with a neutral perspective that it attempts to adopt. It is already spirit articulating nature. It is already aesthetic reflection for an observer articulating what is irreducible to it. Hence, the use of nature for Hegel is an empty, vague paradox. It doesn't lend itself to aesthetic representation or to aesthetic cultural discourse. Now, there's more to say about that, but I won't. Instead, I will say that through Lacan, and because it's time now, through Lacan and Hegel, the misuse of the category of nature doesn't reveal that we've yet to perfectly examine what is cultural or discursive, etc., and what is natural. It simply reveals that in itself, the category of nature is incomplete. It's not the alter to culture. It simply is a obscure formation that exists, but every attempt to articulate it is a perverted, fetishized, cultured attempt. And I think that sexuality, Lacan teaches us this to an extent. There's more to say, but I'll stop there because Jake will tell me off otherwise. Thank you.